Toasted pizza. I've seen this question a couple times, and I don't know the answer. I think my V2 goggles are stuck in FPV mode. There's no option to pick digital systems. Should I downgrade the firmware? Toasted pizza, I've seen a couple situations where there was no option to select other systems. In one case, I said to the guy, "Are you sure you don't have V1 goggles?" Because the V1 goggles never got the option to bind to the DJI FPV drone. They never got any of that digital stuff. And he said, no, they're V2 goggles. And I said, well, are you sure? And he went back and looked and he was like, oh, no, yes, you're right. So if you have the V2 goggles and you cannot pick any of the digital systems, then number one, update the firmware, because if you never updated the firmware, then you may not have got a firmware that can do digital. But then number two, if you're on the latest firmware and you still just don't see that option in the setup menu, you might accidentally have the V1 goggles. So
I think that might be on the nose piece as the easy reference. If you flip the goggles upside down and look at the bottom of the nose piece.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
I think also the antennas, although many people got rid of their stock antennas. The antennas have like a divot on them. Blunty, let's see. Let's see if we can find like some pictures of the V2 goggles. Is there something about the nose piece? What are we doing here?
I believe it's like literally actually labeled under there, like a little label with the battery voltage. Yeah, and V2s are 6S, but V1s are 4S.
Oh, you're right. Oh, come here. You are right. Oh, right here. Yeah. It's like lasered in here. I can barely see it in the light. It says FPV goggles V2. Yeah. Okay. So right here on the underside of the nose piece, it says FPV goggles V2 or V1, and that's the first thing I would have you do. Because I can tell you for sure, I just last week, had an email with somebody who was like, it's so weird. And I was like, yeah, it is weird. And then I was like, are you sure you don't have the V1? And he was like, no, I don't have the V1. And it turned out he did. So shit happens. Let's see here.
One other thing can I suggest real quick? Is absolutely. If for any DJI firmware issues on the goggles, if nobody can really tell you what's going on, I would typically suggest you go to FPV WTF Discord and ask in the general or troubleshooting channels there about the DJI issues, because typically they've seen a lot of these for people that are trying to root. Mm-hmm. And so they'll know like, oh, actually you need to do this, or actually you have this, or that sort of thing. They can probably point you in the right direction.
I thought you were going to suggest that they use FPV WTF butter to roll them back. That's another thing you could try. If you've got anything weird with your DJI firmware, you can, and if you want to download FPV WTF butter, if you don't know what that is, search FPV WTF butter. I've got a video about it. But it's basically a utility that rolls back your goggles to an old firmware and just completely factory refreshes them. And they can sometimes fix issues. Also, JBD FPV points out that the V1s don't say V1. They just say DJI FPV goggles. But the V2s do say V2. Okay, so thank you for pointing that out, JBD.